I wanted to ask you to speak on what your work is and how you see your work being kind of the cornerstone or the foundation, because really you guys have so much capacity for the foundation to be laid for all of humanity, and it's exciting. So go ahead and just speak to whatever comes to you and just share with our listeners, because I really am grateful for your time tonight.
Well, thank you. For me, it started 20 years ago now, working with Native people on the West Coast, and, like with you, my old life was destroyed when I was tossed out of the United Church, lost my family, lost daily access to my kids, really because of a definite, you use the word conspiracy these days, and it's been kind of nullified as a legitimate word, but it's definitely happened. It was a criminal conspiracy to destroy my life because of what I had uncovered. And as my life was taken apart, another life was being put together. And I think we're all put here with a purpose, and I finally found my purpose. And it's largely along the lines you're talking about, but there's even more to it now. It isn't just about these crimes that we've put together that went on in the so-called Indian boarding schools, but it's a whole global system that's very old and involves traumatizing whole generations of people deliberately as a means of social control. A lot of these techniques were tried out on vulnerable groups like Indian kids who have no rights under the law. Under the Indian Act in Canada, they're not citizens. They're wards of the state. And that means you can do whatever you want to in India legally and get away with it. But it also involves any captive group, orphans, military personnel, prisoners, anybody really who's vulnerable. And what I began to realize is that this is, part of a very old agenda. And people are becoming more aware of it these days, but it's always been here. It's always been active. The most recent manifestation of it, you mentioned MKUltra. In the 1950s, it started up as a way to basically militarize the entire society and numb people to violence and increase the overt form of dumbing down and mental control, which is so active now that it's mind-boggling when you look at the extent of it in society. But let me just say before I continue that a lot of this information is posted up online. All my research, the interviews, the evidence from genocide in these Indian boarding schools, it's all up at hiddennolonger.com, where you can also view our documentary film Unrepentant, and that, and also the tribunal I work with. We've set up a tribunal in 5 countries called the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, which is looking at the collusion between the Vatican and the Crown of England, really to set up this whole genocidal system centuries ago. It's at itccs.org. You can read some of the indictments and the activities that we're trying to do to bring criminal charges against the Pope and the Queen of England, and having a lot of support all over Europe, especially with that effort. And so, yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell where I'm at now. But I think what people need to realize is that this wasn't aimed at just some exotic group. It's aimed now at all of us, and it's very active. And,
exactly.
Yeah, it's very important for that reason for people to realize what's being done to them and to turn off their televisions especially. There's been a lot of research done which is out there. I'm probably repeating things you already know, but television induces an alpha state in your brain, which is comparable to when you're about to fall asleep. You're in a very suggestive place, and what it's been doing, especially since 9/11, is to induce a permanent state of fear and psychosis in people so that they can be manipulated all the more easily. But the fact that they're doing that in the last 10 years means they're at a crisis point. They have to more overtly control the population because their control is slipping. And that's the thing to realize here. It's because of how weak people are becoming that they're taking these repressive measures. Well, I'm working with a lot of different groups, and one of them is the Mohawk, or the Ongwahonwe people in Brantford, Ontario, the Six Nations. And we actually started excavating a mass grave of children who had died at an Indian boarding school run by the Anglican Church there, right outside Brantford. And they have a term they use. They don't talk about healing or reconciliation. Those are pretty much Government of Canada words. They talk about reclamation, not just reclaiming the land they've just taken from them, reclaiming the remains of the children who were killed in these residential schools, but reclaiming their own soul. And it's kind of a model that I like to use now in terms of personal work we all need to do, and then the social work. in terms of claiming back that which was taken from all of us and is every day taken from us. So, for example, we have the power to reverse all of this tomorrow if we just acted in unison. I often say to people like, I got a call, for example, from 3 people in Albany, New York, where there's a local Catholic church where a priest is a known child raper. He's been in the pulpit for years. He's molested kids all over the place, and the bishop looks the other way. The police won't do anything about it. So what I said to them is, look, you can get up in that church and confront this man non-violently and just name him for what he is. And they did that. And the guy's not come back ever since. So people have the right to and the power to overcome their own fear and to protect their children in that way, right? But we're all conditioned to always defer to somebody else. And overcoming that mental dependence and slavery, that's the first step. So I think nothing can really happen in a big way until we're all doing that work individually and in our small groups where we can have the most impact in our communities. And, and your words are really important. More people are coming to that awareness. You see, we're all indigenous. We all carry an indigenous spirit. Unfortunately, working among many Native people, I have relatives and I have ancestry as well that's mixed blood Métis from central Canada. But I never knew that for most of my life because the family would never talk about it. There was shame attached to having any kind of Native blood. And what people need to realize is that there aren't actually a lot of indigenous people left, not with the old teachings. Native communities are so traumatized that they've lost most of what they were, and they are struggling to recover it. But the prospect in a lot of areas isn't that great, and there's only a handful of people here and there who are holding onto the language and the traditions. And I agree, those are the ones who we need to link up with. But by and large, I'll give you an example right here in the West Coast. The logging that's going on in the old-growth cedar forests on Vancouver Island, there's only about 1% of it left. The only company logging in the old-growth forest is owned 100% by the Hausat Indian Band. It's a native-owned logging company that's logging off the last old growth, and so it isn't so much who we are in terms of the culture as what do we identify with. It isn't human beings that are destroying the planet. It's this machinery, this system that we all adhere to, and we can divorce ourselves from that machine and let it fall. And I think people all over are waking up to that in many different cultures. So it's those people, we need to unite. And really, if we don't win this battle, we're all going down. I think we know that, and it isn't just Fukushima that's showing us. We're aware of this now. More and more of us, we're waking up.
Give the listeners, for those out there that aren't, maybe somehow they haven't a full perspective of what happened in these reservation schools. Do you mind just speaking on that?
No. I know there's a lot of unawareness about this. In a nutshell, this was both in the United States and Canada. The Catholic Church in the mid to late 1800s set up these schools. They were set up by both the Church of England and the Catholic Church, the Jesuits. Laws that said children had to be incarcerated in these places or their parents would go to jail. In Canada, there was a law prescribing that as far back as 1920. About 250,000 kids were incarcerated in these places. They weren't really schools. They weren't taught a lot of education. They were internment camps, and the death rate ranged from 30 to 60%. So, on average, half these children never came back. We're talking at least 50 to 100,000 children who died in these schools over a century. Mm-hmm. They were never fed, quite often, brutalized, used as slave labor, child trafficking, medical experimentation. They had sterilization programs where children who refused to learn English and who resisted were sterilized en masse. All of that is genocide under international law. And there's mass graves all over Canada. We've identified 28 of them already near these former places. Indian hospitals where they were doing these experiments. Not one person has ever been brought to trial in Canada for any of these deaths. You've had a few people put on trial for rape and that. But the churches that did these things, the Catholic, the Anglican, the United Church of Canada, they've gotten off scot-free. The government did a deal where in return for an apology and a bit of money, they never had to face any prosecution. And it's outrageous. That fact alone is just outrageous to think that Canadian taxpayers are supporting these institutions that did these crimes, and they can get away with them so easily. So that's part of the campaign we've been doing to say these are institutions that